Have you ever stopped to wonder where each member of the Watterson family came from? Who are they really, and what are their origins? Richard. For example, we know that Richard is a pink rabbit who weighs over 220 pounds and is somewhere between 40 and 45 years old. But he wasn't always like that, and there's actually a very intriguing reason why he's a first-class slacker, completely supported by his wife and doesn't even help raise the kids. It all starts in the past when we see Richard standing at a window on a rainy night, saying goodbye to his father Frankie, who we'll talk about in more detail soon. Little Richard had no idea that would be the last time he'd see his dad for years, until Frankie suddenly reappears when Richard is already an adult with 3 kids. Richard was also constantly mistreated by his strict mother, Joanna Watterson, who always made him feel bad about himself. That was one of the sad parts of Richard's story, but one of the happiest moments from his childhood was also about to happen. The day he met Nicole, the love of his life. While stuck in a tree trunk, Richard was helped by Nicole, who was on her way to a karate tournament. She ended up missing the event after spending a long time talking to him. We know that after that meeting, the two became sort of friends, as seen in the episode The Cape, where Nicole stands up for little Richard when the other kids tease him for calling himself the Caped Cotton Crusader. Richard grows up and marries Nicole. More on her backstory later, and then tries out several jobs, but he ends up getting fired from everyone for the same reason. The laws of logic and nature completely fall apart, and reality itself gets distorted whenever Richard works. We see this in The Job. That's why he eventually gave up working altogether, and even Nicole prefers that he never works again, just to keep the entire universe from falling apart. And although today we know and love him as the Big Pink Bunny, Richard wasn't always like this. He was originally named Harry Watterson, and in his very first design, he wasn't even a rabbit, he was a blue dog. That was the creator's original idea for Gumball's dad. Thankfully, they changed his design, because honestly, we can't picture Richard looking any other way now. Can you? But there are still many more members of the Watterson family we need to talk about. Let's explore the origin of every member of Gumball's family together. Darwin. If you've watched the show, you've probably noticed that Darwin looks nothing like the rest of the Wattersons. That's because his origin is explained in the Origins Part 1 and Part 2, where we learn how this little orange fish goes from being just a pet to becoming an official Watterson family member. At that time, Aeneas hadn't been born yet. She would come along years later. There's not much info about Darwin's biological parents. Maybe they were among those whose lives were accidentally ruined by the Wattersons' irresponsibility, if you catch my drift. Darwin once mentioned that his birth parents left him an inheritance, a treasure chest full of bubbles. What we do know is that somehow Darwin ended up among the magical items sold by the mysterious Van Guy, where Richard bought him. This hints that Darwin might have been special from the start. Even though he grew legs and can breathe out of water, Darwin still needs hydration to survive. He's adapted to partial water exposure, as explained in the episode The Fish. Out of everyone in the Watterson family, Darwin has had the most girlfriends: Terry, Rachel, Tobias's twin sister, and of course, Carrie. What most people don't know is that in the very first concept for the show, Darwin was just supposed to be Gumball's best friend, not his brother. You can see this in the original pilot, but thankfully the creators changed that, because otherwise we'd be missing one very important Watterson from this list. Aeneas. Now let's talk about the youngest Watterson. Unlike her parents and brothers, Aeneas was born with extraordinary intelligence, which makes her the most rational member of the entire family. However, she didn't always have such a kind heart. On the contrary, when she was still just a little baby, she had dark plans to become an only child and get rid of both Gumball and Darwin. But once she realized how much they truly loved her, she gave up on her plan and decided to accept them as her brothers. While she was still a toddler, she got what would become her best friend, Daisy the donkey doll. However, over time, we find out that Daisy is actually haunted by a sinister entity that initially pretends to love Anais, completely terrifying the poor girl. Later on, we even see Daisy have a creepy nightmare where she is the owner, and Anais is just a doll being horribly mistreated in every possible way. Despite her young age, Anais attends the same school as Gumball and Darwin, and is already enrolled in advanced classes, basically functioning at a high school level. Clearly, her future is bright. Unlike other members of the family, Anais didn't have an earlier prototype version, but she was inspired by the real-life sister of series creator Ben Bocquelet. Nicole, long before becoming the strongest being in the Gumball universe, Nicole was raised in an extremely strict household by her parents, Mary and Daniel. The youngest version of Nicole's past appears in the episode The Parents, where we see her as a newborn already dressed like a business executive, exactly what her parents dreamed she would become. Later, we see her taking her first steps, getting bullied by her own teacher, Miss Simeon, riding her bike for the first time, and crashing. Nicole was a natural-born martial artist, as we clearly see in her epic showdown with Yuki, Masami's mom. And as we mentioned earlier, it was while heading to a karate tournament that Nicole met Richard, and they fell for each other instantly. After dating for a few years, and with her parents disapproving of the relationship, Nicole eventually decided to leave home. She was disowned, while Richard was also kicked out by his mom for the same reason. They then got married and moved into a small house next to the subway tracks. Nicole inherited her temper and strength from her father Daniel, something we clearly see when he rips the engine out of his car with one punch just because he's mad at a traffic jam. That's what turned Nicole into a super strict and disciplined mom, someone the rest of the family is honestly a bit scared of. Like Anais, Nicole was inspired by someone in Ben Bocquelet's real-life family, his own mother, who's also named Nicole. Before we move on to the next Watterson family member, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Kenneth. Now let's talk about a Watterson family member that's almost always forgotten. Kenneth, the little monster created by Gumball and Darwin, who the two consider to be their son. Kenneth was born from a mix of the grossest stuff imaginable, including Gumball's snotty tissues, bird poop, lint from Richard's belly button, and vomit, all microwaved together. From the moment he came to life, Kenneth was destructive. His first instinct was to try and eat Darwin's left eye. After devouring pretty much everything and growing enormous, he was eventually taken down by Gumball and Darwin. But then, for some reason, the Wattersons decided to raise him again. Only this time he got even bigger, fighting helicopters and the Elmore police just to prove that Gumball is always wrong. Later, we see Kenneth inside a jar pulled out of the freezer by Richard in the Season 2 finale. And once again, he turns into a giant and battles Hector in the middle of the city. Since then, Kenneth has never been seen or mentioned again. But if I had to guess, I'd say he's probably still somewhere in the Wattersons' freezer. Jumping back 2 generations, let's now talk about Gumball's grandparents. Starting with Joanna, or just Granny Jojo. We know she's a strict, bossy, and authoritarian woman. In terms of appearance, she looks a lot like an older version of Anais, which makes sense since they're practically the same height, even though there's over 60 years between them. She's extremely controlling with everyone around her, especially Richard, her grandkids, and Louis, her boyfriend. But when it comes to Nicole, she disapproves of absolutely everything she does. Her relationship with Nicole is the perfect example of the classic mother-in-law versus daughter-in-law dynamic. She even kicked Richard out of the house when he told her he was going to marry Nicole. Speaking of Louis, although Jojo is a rabbit, she clearly has a thing for mice. Her current boyfriend is basically a creepy knockoff version of Mickey Mouse, the most famous mouse in animation. Likewise, Frankie, Richard's dad, is also a mouse, which fits him perfectly since he's basically a con man. Or should we say, a rat. He tricked his own son and his family just to try and take over their house. He didn't show a shred of remorse for his actions until he remembered the day he left Richard and apologized for hurting his family. Even so, despite how selfish he is, Richard still asked him to be part of the family again. Frankie also shares some traits with Richard. He's lazy, unreliable, and a terrible father. Just much worse. Daniel and Mary. Nicole's parents, Daniel and Mary, have always had a complicated and tense relationship with their daughter. This all stems from a major falling out they had years ago, which only began to heal 20 years later when they finally met their grandchildren for the first time. Even though Mary is cold and distant, the day Nicole left home, we can clearly see a moment of sadness on her face. That brief expression shows that, deep down, she really didn't want Nicole to leave, and that she truly loves her, despite disapproving of all her choices. Just like Richard's mother, Nicole's parents didn't attend the wedding either. But many years later, Nicole learns the reason why. They misunderstood the name of the wedding venue and accidentally ended up in a town in Moldova, on the other side of the world. But the truth is, they really do love their daughter. And in the end, everything was resolved between them, even though they still keep trying to break Nicole and Richard apart. Like that one time they tried to ship Gumball's dad and the kids off in a container to Guatemala. Gumball. There's no doubt that Gumball is the most important character in the entire show. After all, the series is named after him. Originally, his birth name was Zach, and Gumball was just a cute nickname his parents gave him because of his big round head, which looked like a gumball. As a child, Gumball was extremely hyperactive, constantly getting into trouble. His parents were so overwhelmed that they bought a pet fish just to get a few hours of sleep. And that's how Darwin came into the picture, as we explained earlier. Now, when it comes to Gumball's real-life origin, the creator Ben Bocquelet originally wanted him to be a blue dog, not a cat, because Ben is actually allergic to cats. But Cartoon Network's executives made him change the character's species. That led to a version inspired by Felix the cat, where Gumball was a black cat. That concept was then updated to a square-headed blue cat, and eventually evolved into the final design we all know and love today. And many fans believe that someday, we'll get to see new versions of Gumball, perhaps as a teenager or even as an adult. Only time will tell, don't you think? And just like that, our list of all the Watterson family members has come to an end. But if you enjoyed this deep dive as much as we enjoyed making it, don't forget, we've got 2 more awesome videos right here for you to keep the fun going. See you next time.